Jim, I want to thank you for coming. I had the opportunity to meet Jim last year when Jim came to speak at my request at our national retreat, the first one for Lumen in Naples, Florida. I went out and met with Jim. We had lunch in the cafeteria with the students. As we sat there, Jim knew everyone by name. They came up, I was introduced, knew everything about their interests, what they're studying, and had such great love for them. And so a president of an outstanding university, but moreover a shepherd of these students. And I was blown away by the students and by his care and relationship with them. After that, I had the honor of being invited to be a trustee of Ave Maria. So at Jim and the trustees' request, so we've been involved, Wendy and I, in many things there already, and it's a real work of God to see these students. And I encourage everyone, especially if you're down for the retreat, to spend some time there and see the students and also see St. Mother Teresa's project, St. Teresa Calcutta's project that's there, resides at the university, the only one of its kind. Wendy and I also were invited with the trustees and students, some students, to go with Jim as guests of the missionaries' charity to the canonization. So I was there with Wendy, and it was to see Jim up there, but just to witness the love for St. Teresa. It's not lost to me. Today is All Saints' Day, and this is the year for Ave Maria of St. Teresa Calcutta. It's her year for the university to celebrate her sainthood, and certainly this is a special day for Ave Maria because of that. But at the end of the day, I'm really grateful you could be here. It was a great pilgrimage we had. The relationships that we have as a group of trustees is unique because of our faith and the mission of Ave Maria University. But let's get to Jim now, and thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Well, thank you very much, John, for the very nice introduction. I'm going to sit here on a stool, I think, until I realize this is uncomfortable and won't work. And thank you, BJ, for inviting me. The opportunity to come here was a real privilege for us down in South Florida to be up here in the big leagues. When you come from Ave Maria to New York City, this is a big deal. So we're grateful to John and happy to see Father Sliney, who I've known for a long time. Used to be in our home making peanut butter sandwiches with our 5 kids and going out to give them to the poor of the DC area with other. He's always been a shepherd of youth and has a real gift there, so he's helped me in the parenting category. Father Stephen, welcome, our priest. We're grateful for your vocation. And I have a connection to the Lumen Institute because I was introduced to the ways of academia at the knee of Chris Dennehu, who I think was one of the individuals starting this institute from the beginning, and also with Dan Daniello, who's going to be honored by our university this year. And I've gotten to know him, and it's beautiful and inspiring to see lay individuals living their faith. And Ave Maria University was started by Tom Monahan, the pizza guy, Domino's Pizza, who made his fortune, sold it on Wall Street, and took $360 million to transform tomato fields into a thriving Catholic liberal arts institution. We now have 1,100 students. So the idea of a lay individual taking very seriously their calling, their vocational calling, it resonates on our campus. And you probably met Brian Couch, our Vice President for Advancement, and Tina Morocco, who are both here also. And I'm sure they passed out some of our propaganda. So you'll learn a little bit about the school, but I invite you to make a pilgrimage during the winter down to Ave Maria, and if you do, contact them, and we'll give you the same tour that I think captivated John and Wendy, and we're very thankful that they're part of the Ave Maria University family. I love the symmetry tonight of being asked to talk about Mother Teresa and about her recent canonization. The symmetry of that with the World Series between the Cubs and the Indians, the poorest of the poor, really in Major League Baseball. So this is a year where at least one of them gets elevated. And I'm glad to provide a distraction for the presidential campaign. I don't know if there are enough air sickness bags in this country for all the voting booths we have out there, but it's making us all a little crazy. I woke up this morning wanting to build a wall around Ave Maria and get Notre Dame to pay for it. It affects us all. Anyway, our confidence is in God and not in government. And so obviously the Lord's inviting us to a deeper trust. Mother Teresa, one of the things that I did for her was protect the use of her name. I was her lawyer, privileged to work for her for 12 years. And happy to talk about her some tonight. One of the things I did by protecting the use of her name was to prohibit fundraising, because believe it or not, she prohibited fundraising. She said she preferred the insecurity of divine providence, which is something we're all experiencing now, isn't it? A little, the insecurity that you feel when you see some of our biggest institutions showing signs of instability. But our security has always been in divine providence, not in the institutions of man. And so we're reminded of that now more than ever. Now, as a college president, I like fundraising and divine providence. Like two wings of the eagle. So, but I think it's worth thinking about, as we talk about, I'm not going to go too long, and then I'm going to do Q&A. So I'll make sure I stay on the schedule here. BJ's been very nice to invite me. You'd first wonder, what about Mother Teresa in higher education, and what could she possibly teach the world when, first of all, she had only a high school education, had really no experience with academia. The times that she was on a college campus seemed rather strange to her. She spoke at a number of American institutions and never quite got all of that, but she knew what higher ed was, of course, and she was an extremely intelligent woman. Then you'd wonder, well, then what does she have to teach us? Teach academia, teach you and me? And it's the same question that you could pose about St. Teresa the Little Flower, who also had a very modest education, largely homeschooled. She was, in the convent at such a young age that her formal education really ended at about 15. And yet she's a doctor of the church. And you read about her life and her little way and her invitation for us to learn how to do little things with great love and to trust in God. It's a message that Mother also embraced and was named after the Little Flower, not Teresa of Avila, the great saint of Spain. Mother was named after the Little Flower and embraced that invitation. She founded her order on three things: total surrender, loving trust, and cheerfulness. The three characteristics, the charisms of the missionaries of charity, unique within the church. Total surrender, loving trust, and cheerfulness. Again, you don't have to be ensconced in academia and all of its trappings to realize quickly that simple knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge without guidance by the divine providence is doomed to fail. When you look at the list of all the great institutions in America, faith-based institutions, they all started off, all the top 20 colleges in America, they all started off as faith-based institutions. Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, all of them were rooted in Jesus Christ. So what happened along the way? Interesting questions about that. But I think what I watched with Mother, it resonates Psalm 27. One thing I ask of the Lord, this I seek, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, that I may gaze on the loveliness of the Lord and contemplate his holy temple, which I often thought of as Our Lady. Mother had a great Marian devotion. But to gaze on the loveliness of the Lord, that's the pursuit of truth. That's what a college should be about. We have 24/7 adoration on our campus to help the students connect that life of adoration and prayer with the studies, with faith and reasons married up together in a Catholic liberal arts institution. And I think that that's what Mother sought, that's what the Lumen Institute seeks. I've read some of the literature and admire what the Lumen Institute's trying to do and trying to develop community and engagement, lay engagement. This isn't a spectator sport to pray, pay, and obey. It's an invitation to actually be engaged in the new evangelization, the life of the church, which we're trying to do down at Ave Maria. And to see the alignment really with Mother's life, I was struck by that, because when I looked at the faith and leadership and character, those are at the heart of what she did with her nuns. That's what she tried. She tried to form leaders. I see these women running AIDS homes, and I lived in an AIDS home for a year with the sisters. And this was at a time in the 80s when the disease was extremely aggressive, and the people didn't live long. It was very difficult work and very hard work. And these sisters did it with so much cheerfulness. And when Mother was being canonized, the Wall Street Journal called up and wanted an interview about her order. And think about it. Some of you are in business. She had no computers. She ran in 120 countries. Her books were done by hand until very recently when the Indian government asked, they required them to do some online, so then they got one computer. But even during the canonization, the beatification, from the time Mother died in 1997, Rome required them to bring a computer into the Mother House in Calcutta. So they had that there. But how do you go to 120 countries? Coca-Cola, the multinational corporations spend fortunes to train people about the cultures and the languages. She just sent these 4 women in there. And they would love. They would figure it out. They would learn 10 words a day in that language, and then they would become enculturated somewhat. And then they would get transferred within region. There was a genius to it. You'd go to Mother's room, and there were 40 boxes, little cheap wooden cardboard boxes that broke the world up into 40 regions. And then she had a council of 6. The genius of all this, she didn't study this. This was the guidance of the Holy Spirit, but it also showed that if she trusted in the Lord, He'd equip her for the battle. She used to say, pray I don't spoil God's work. It was so fun. It's like, no, I spoil. You never spoil, Mother. But she meant that. It wasn't like fishing for compliments. She'd say, pray I don't spoil God's work. That was that loving trust and that surrender. Of course she felt mismatched. And, she found it kind of funny at the end when she would go. I would take her to meetings, with people, in the U.S. government. She'd see the president, or remember the morning of the prayer breakfast in 1994, she goes to meet the Clintons for the first time. We were very wary about this meeting because he was, up for re-election, and we didn't want her to be a photo in his next campaign in an ad, right? So we were setting up, and this one woman, Sandy McMurtry, who actually went in with Mother and a sister into the area where the Clintons were. The rules were all set. They proceed to violate them. And George Stephanopoulos goes, oh, can we get a photo? And she actually put her hand over his camera. No, that's not going to happen. Sandy did that. But Mother would feel very intimidated by it. She could feel it because she always spoke of herself as a pencil. She said, I'm a pencil in the hand of God that He writes love letters to the world with. So she trusted it. And I know you can get in jobs and professions where you just sometimes feel like you're over your head or you're out of your league. This is too complicated and all the changes. But if the Lord places you there, if it is truly vocational, He equips you for the battle. And Mother believed that. And I share that to encourage you, because when you look at our culture today and you look at all of the wars, and you look at the attacks on marriage and family and life, and you look at all of the discouraging trends, correct, that we all see. I certainly, with 5 kids, with the internet and a click away from horror in a kid's life, some of the stuff's unimaginable generations before. And in the midst of all that, you remember Solzhenitsyn's characterization of the 20th century when he was asked what was the chief principal trait of the 20th century. And this great observer, he simply said, man has forgotten God. And in our culture, we look at how very systematically, perniciously, the interests of adults have been placed ahead of children. And Mother understood it always to be upside down. This was at the heart of the children and the little and the weak. No, the interests of adults were placed in the service of these children. That's why you have an abortion culture, and that's why you have throwaway marriages and all the different issues that come up, because it's the interests of adults ahead of kids. And in a university, to cultivate, which comes out of the Garden of Eden command to go and cultivate the earth. John Paul II wrote beautifully on this, if you ever want to read it, about the origin of culture. But to cultivate the earth, and Lumen Institute seeks to transform the culture, through your individual vocations, but that's what you seek to do. Well, that's what a Catholic higher education institution should be doing, transforming, engaging the culture. And this is certainly something that Mother did throughout her life. Mother also saw the importance of being hopeful. And a Catholic college has to have that virtue of hope. Sometimes, again, referring to our culture today, it can become almost a drumbeat like the end times are here, the world's going to crap, and it's going to all end. You can get this attitude, and Mother was the most hopeful person. And she worked in Calcutta, which was a sea of misery and dysfunction and brokenness, the government, everything. Every aspect of it. I went there for the first time in 1985. I go, by the grace of God, I take 12 students every May so they can be immersed in the world that inspired her culture. In the midst of all that, she was so hopeful. She was so hopeful. We're not pallbearers of a doomed future. We're called to be servants of a hopeful future because the gospel is always good news. It's always a sunrise. It's always springtime in the church. Even at the cross with Our Lady, where it couldn't have been more hopeless to see the Son of God killed by those he loved. And yet in the midst of that, there she was, the depository of hope. That beyond that crucifixion and that apparent defeat was in fact waiting this glorious resurrection. And I believe that in our times too. We have to be helping our young people seize that. They're not doomed pallbearers. They're not ones that are just simply carrying a future that's gone and lost because we all messed it up. Because every age can claim that. And a college has to inspire that in students, as Mother did. Mother had a great sense of humor. She liked to joke with her sisters. She liked to, I remember one time in San Francisco, I was sitting in the back and she's talking to this group of women that were about to take their vows for the first time with the Missionaries of Charity. And she was talking about, she just said, the poor have enough problems. If you can't smile at them, go home. If you can't smile at them, go home. Then she started to proceed to imitate the nun coming in and all grumpy. And the sisters were all squealing, laughter. She was like, how are you? God loves you. But she was all, this real long face. And, but the point she was making is for us too, to be heralds of the good news and to treat it like the good news. And of course, we now know after her death that she had known darkness. That, in fact, after being given these incredible one-on-one conversations with Jesus, if you read that, and a book, Come Be My Light, has her own words describing it, she's put under obedience to describe, here's what happened. Very much like other saints that we celebrate today, Margaret Mary, others that have had these very direct communications with Jesus. But after those privileged days in the late 40s, nothing after that. And so she wrote about the darkness. She said she's going to be a saint of darkness. I was reading, and Mother, of course, she's, as much as she smiled and as hopeful as she was, obviously her life was wrapped in mystery. And I asked Sister Nirmala, her closest friend, right after they sent me the galley proofs of the Come Be My Light book that had all of her letters, I was working then as the faith-based director for President Bush, and they FedExed them to me at the Hilton in Newark at that train station there. And I remember reading it just absolutely stunned. Mother? I mean, I saw how mortified her life was. She had had malaria dozens of times. She had broken her ribs, her arm, I remember one time with an abscess tooth, just holding her hand, she's burning with fever because she didn't treat it because she didn't have time, and she hated dentists. She hated doctors too. No offense to anyone here, but she avoided them like the plague. She didn't want to go to the doctor. She didn't want to take her medicine. She didn't want to go for tests. All of this is actually pretty funny how she approached all that. But she was she knew the darkness, but she knew there was a happy ending to it. One story, when my wife was pregnant with our third child, we were living in Tallahassee, and she was, mother was coming to Washington. We wanted her to bless the baby. And so we left our other two little brats home and flew up to Washington. We get to the Gift of Peace home where she's staying. We come in the foyer. Mother sees Mary, and she goes, "Oh, Mary, you're pregnant. When are you due?" And she said, "Well, I'm due August 8th, but I think I'll be early because we just had Joe." And Mother said, "No, you'll have that baby on my birthday." We're like, "Mother, your birthday's August 26th. You know, I'm thinking, Mother, if she's 18 days late, my life's going to be a living heck. Long story short, the night of August 25th, Mary goes into labor. We're going to have a little girl. We're going to, name her Teresa. And midnight strikes, 1:20 in the morning, just as she predicts. Out comes our baby on August 26th. The doctor says, "Congratulations, you have a little boy." And my wife, I swear, said, "Are you sure?" And they said, "Yeah, here's how we tell." In med school, this is how they train him. But while Mary was still in the hospital, I got a call from Calcutta, and the sister said, "We don't think Mother's going to make it. She's in intensive care. Can you get back here?" And Sandy McMurtry, who was much closer to Mother than I, in Washington, she and first my mom came over to help Mary, and Mary gave me a picture of our little Maximilian that I could take to show Mother that she was right. Sandy and I flew back to Calcutta. When we got to the airport, the sisters met us there. They said, "We probably should go straight to the hospital because Mother's back on oxygen. And it looks great." We raced to this Woodlands nursing center, very primitive care setting, windows open in intensive care with smoke and bugs flying in and out. It was just different. And I walked in there. The sisters, there was just like a buzz of activity in the area. I was kind of in an anteroom that could see ahead. And there was just this buzz of activity, and I looked at Sister's Mother. I was about, did she just pass away or what? They said, "No, she was laying there on her back, and she was looking up and pointing like this, and she had her oxygen mask on." And the sisters were confused at what she was pointing at. Was she having a vision? What was she pointing at? And she moved the mask to the side, and she said, "I'm going home. I'm going home to God." Those were her words, She had a compass. She had orientation. So many youth today in colleges in America, they're disoriented. It's a thicket. It's so confusing. What do I do? How do I fit in? I don't want to live under a Catholic bubble. I want to live out in the world, but it's such a challenging environment. You need that compass, and a Catholic college has to equip students with that orientation, that they came from God in the image and likeness of the Creator, and that they were going to go home to God one day. And that's your horizon, that's your trajectory. All Saints Day, a great reminder for us that that's our destiny, that's the journey, the call to holiness, a universal call, imperfections and all. The little flower always wrote of herself how imperfect she was, and she was a spoiled little girl when she was growing up. Her parents got canonized, by the way. So those of us who've made parenting mistakes, there's hope. They spoiled her badly. She cried all the time, oversensitive. If you correct it, she just spent half her childhood crying. But then she had this change on Christmas 1886, and then voila, off she went to the races to love God and accept that grace of her life. And the mother had that same sense, but that, of weakness and imperfection and unworthiness. When you read her letters, it's just abundantly clear she felt that way. And yet she had that tremendous hope and that compass that oriented every action of hers. And she became a saint by her choices, just by her daily choices. She became a saint. And she went home to God in a manner that was very evangelical. As we all age, in America, of course, discards are disabled and are elderly, and we treat infirmity like it's a curse, very much like in Jesus' time with the man born blind, where it's a curse and it's a punishment. Or, why did he get Alzheimer's and this one not, and this one Parkinson's, and this one ALS, but this one healthy, and So we have this same kind of very worldly perspective on illness and infirmity, when in fact, if God gives that cross to someone, it's an invitation to evangelize and to show that this is a journey. Yes, I'm being asked to suffer, but I'm suffering with Jesus and for Jesus. And in the process, this suffering can be very healing and evangelical in the lives of the children and grandchildren who are watching you age and watching you deal with infirmity. And they're watching us. Are we visiting the sick and lonely and the infirm? And so, and another thing about Mother's life that I want to stress was her devotion to prayer and how college kids need that. With the earbuds and the handhelds, like almost all of our recruiting now is done through the handheld device. If you can't, we have brochures and you'll see some of that. We give that to parents. The parents want the hard paper, The kids are all on their handhelds and they're getting all their information about the world there. The gospel, sure, but the troubles that can come through that. So they get this tremendous assault, bombardment of their senses. And in the process, they can lose the ability to cultivate beauty, to befriend silence. They can lose that sense of wonder and awe. And in the process, they do not know their divine purpose. They cannot sense the calling that they have. Why was I born? That's what a college is supposed to help, encourage, is a growing realization of my purpose in life. Why was I born? What's my purpose? How can I follow a path that's uniquely mine? And that's what a liberal arts education has to do, is to help create that. And Mother had this discipline. She said, if you're too busy to pray, you're too busy. If you're too busy to pray, you're too busy. And in this city here, oh my gosh, you can get run over in busyness, right? So you have to have that discipline to pray. What did Mother do? She got up at 4:40 every morning. She had that prayer time in the morning. She had prayer in the chapel. She had Holy Mass. She had at least an hour of adoration a day. She had, of course, the the litany of the hour, the liturgical life of the church that she lived as religious lived. And then she had a night prayer. But then, of course, then she would go out and she said, pray the work. Pray the work. But it all began with prayer. It all began with that quiet. Now, I lived for 14 months with the Missionaries of Charity Fathers, and I loved the luxury that we had of that organized life of prayer. You better do that or you're no good to the laity if you aren't living that life of prayer. But it was also, it's taught me that even as a dad and in my job and all of the challenges with that, and as a husband, first and foremost, you have to pray together. And colleges often kind of, you can't force it and coerce it. That's wrong. That's not helping them. Jesus asks, who do you say that I am? Not who do your parents say that I am. The student has to make that embrace of the faith. But you want an environment that it encourages it and cultivates it, invites them, attracts them. And this is what Mother did. She was working in a Hindu and Muslim world and surrounded by people that didn't follow Jesus Christ. But she was rooted in her faith and open to engagement with others. Open to engagement of people of all faiths, none at all. People that had sinned miserably, or as Pascal described sinning, he said it was licking the earth. how Blaise Pascal describes sinning. I love that expression. I've licked the earth. I know the taste. This is when we sin. But then you have the mercy of God. And Mother was so merciful. Mothers are merciful, right? I mean, that's the calling of a mother, is to be ministers of mercy. And Mother Teresa was merciful. I remember many times with people where she'd be alone with them and the person would be weeping, pouring out their heart. I was with Sister Tanya in Washington, who was with Mother when Mother was with Princess Diana. And I was asking a lot of questions about what was that like, and she just said Princess Diana poured out her heart to Mother. She needed a mother. And Mother Teresa always said, say this prayer. I mean, if you remember how many times she said this, she goes, Mary, Mother of Jesus, be a mother to me now. So colleges have to invite, a Catholic college has to invite students to an encounter with Our Lady. How else can they imitate her? Yes. How else can they, God who is mighty has done great things for me. How else can that happen if you're not rooted in your faith and open to engagement with others? The last thing that I'll say is the last time I was with Mother was 10 weeks before she died. At this point in her life, she was 87 years old. She was in a wheelchair. She was, Mary and I drove up, we got in the van, we just brought the kids up. We knew this time we'd never see her again. I thought that every time for the last umpteen times, this is the last time I'd see her because she was such a wreck. I mean, her body was falling apart. Her heart was going this way. So the time in the hospital there, I stayed there for a while when she was in intensive care, and she was very sick with this bad wire that was in her pacemaker that going into her heart, and it got infected. And there's a New York doctor who came to the rescue, Dr. Lombardi. You can actually go online and read his story. It's very entertaining and interesting. And Dr. Patricia from Mexico was in there to help. So all these very good people came in to help. And Mother, by the way, was very sensitive to not have the Westerners come in and save her and humiliate the Indian doctors. So she was going, no, I want to listen to it. She was very solicitous of the Indian doctors that were providing her care, but she was also, trying to gauge others. Can't you all come and talk to each other and all that? So very ingenious about that. But at this point, she had fought the good fight and finished the race and kept the faith, and she was ready to go home to God. And her work was done. She brought Sister Nirmal on this trip because then after she left, when we saw her, she went to Rome, saw the Holy Father, said, here's my successor who had just been elected 2 months earlier. And, now Mother, we were all then going, she's so done. And so we were with her in Washington. She got that Medal of Freedom, and then from Congress, and then she came up to New York, where she was then going to go to Rome. And so I was up on the third floor of her shelter on East 145th Street, and going over the business issues of the Missionaries of Charity and the legal matters and such. And I was trying to make the meeting go on forever because I knew this was it, and I didn't want to leave her. And so this nun came up behind Mother and put her hands on the handles of her wheelchair, which was signaling Mother needed to lay down, time up. And I said, Mother, before you go, can Mary and the kids come up from the courtyard and get your blessing? Before I could finish asking her that, she had stood up from her wheelchair when she heard that. And she said, where are the children? Where are the children? I think of that message, because that's really America's message, isn't it? Starting with the unborn and those that are childlike at the end of life and dependent on others. Where are the children? It's an invitation for us to somehow respond in a meaningful way, however we can, with different responsibilities. And but that question has to be central. Where are the children in our lives and in this world, in our country? And I thought of that childlike heart that she had, that, she had loved until it hurt. That was her expression, love until it hurts. She had done that, and the fruit, that was the fruit of a life lived for others, was a childlike heart that she had. And just very impressive that she said that and what it can mean to us, because it's always said at the end of life that nobody wishes they'd spend more time in the office. I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. But what else nobody ever says is, I wish I hadn't been so involved in the Lumen Institute. I wish I hadn't, prayed so much. I wish I hadn't forgiven so much. I wish I hadn't reconciled with that person I had every right to be mad at for the rest of my life. Nobody ever says that. And what the Lumen Institute invites people to do, I think, is to come together, to develop fellowship, friendship, to share the faith journey, imperfections and all, to build faith and leadership and character so that we can have that virtue of magnanimity that the Lumen Institute talks about. So I wanted to share those words with you because I thought that childlike heart Mother had was from giving her life in service. So we all should go and do the same. I was thinking today at Mass on All Saints' Day, I went over to the Church of the Savior there, and the guy's a kid that'd be good at that parish. He's a great priest, great homily. But while he was talking, I was thinking about the missionaries of charities. Mother said she was going to give saints to Mother Church. She said that over and over. She said that to her sisters all the time. I'm here to give saints to Mother Church. In Yemen in the spring, the ISIS terrorists came in to the compound there, and they killed a bunch of people looking for on the compound where the sisters were caring for mentally ill and disabled people and elderly. There were 5 sisters working there with a bunch of lay help. They grabbed the sisters, 4 of them, duct taped and executed them. And one sister, Sister Sally, she hid herself between a wall and a refrigerator. And she was praying the prayer, Jesus, make me invisible. And the terrorists knew there were 5 there. They'd only gotten 4. And they kept looking for her, and they kept looking for her. Couldn't find her. Finally, they realized they had to leave, and they left. She gets to Jordan. She gets airlifted out. It was a witness to everything that happened to her sisters. The day before Mother's canonization, she was there in St. Peter's. And they had a program that Saturday that was a catechesis the Holy Father's been doing on the Year of Mercy. It's extraordinary. They do it on Saturday morning. Glorious day. But they had a little program before the Holy Father spoke, and there's Sister Sally at the microphone. And she gave this talk that was so hopeful. And she talked about those women that died and the lay people with them that are saints. And they were saints. They died for their faith. And so Mother gave these saints to Mother Church. And when she finished her talk, she went over and kind of bowed before the Holy Father. He sprung out of his chair. He came and he just embraced her. And he just kept kissing her. And whatever you want to think about the virtue of hope, think about the probability of being trapped between a wall and a refrigerator and being 4 months later in the embrace of the Holy Father. When John Paul II was run over by a German truck and was left for dead in a ditch, bleeding to death, there was laying the sovereign pontiff. This is the invitation. So, long answer, that relationship with Jesus is our assurance. And at Ave, we talk about word, sacrament, scholarship, and service. This has to be the 4 pillars upon which a college is based. If it's not, it'll lose its way like all the other faith-based schools. So that was our relationship with Jesus. But that says Sister Sally, when I talked to her sister, simple woman, obviously profoundly changed, but what a beauty, to her vocation and those lay people that became saints with her. Father?
Just a little reflection I've had in my heart. Pope Benedict, Emeritus Benedict, wrote a document, God is Love. And there was a little phrase in there that said, practical activity will always be insufficient unless it is nourished by a personal encounter with Christ. And when I think of Mother Teresa, I don't think of someone just feeding the poor, helping the poor. I think of someone giving Christ to the poor based on her love for Christ that she nourished in prayer, right? And I think there's a risk in this environment to do, and maybe not to pray, so when we do, we're giving them Christ. I don't know if you could elaborate on that point.
Right, the primacy of being over doing, or at least preceding it to where you, yeah. Well, that's what Mother, she always said that God can't fill what's full. And she saw prayer as that emptying that would then, the Lord would then fill you. And then you could go do. Then she goes, you can't give, she goes, how did she put it? Yeah, you can't give out what you don't have. And so, simple enough, but then you think about that. That's true for parents. It's true, you can't, if you don't have that love in your heart, you're not going to be able to dispense it. And in the professional world, it's very difficult. It's an unloving environment. People are lying, people are treacherous, and, all of the sins of the world brought to bear to the marketplace, But Jesus, the relationship she had, when she went to see Castro, and Castro said, welcomed her, but then, we don't have any poor here in Cuba. That's what he told her. We don't have any poor in Cuba. And Mother just looked at, you have elderly, don't you? Well, I'll take care of them. She's very smart, muy lista, ella. Very clever, very, but she got that from prayer. I mean, she had a skill set, obviously, very intelligent woman, extremely best judgment I've ever seen, ability to make a decision, read people, read situations. So obviously, she was prodigiously gifted. But it's what she did with those gifts. So I think that you're right, Father, that there's such a focus now on doing, and it's the cart ahead of the horse. And so that prayer time helps us, that when we're doing it for Him. One time I had her meet with Janet Reno, because immigration was all run through INS, and we had all our visas from the sisters, and we finally worked it out to get these Indian women in the country. It was very complicated. Mother always resented the fact that they had to pay for their visas, and so when Janet Reno was there, and I just remember this tall woman and then little Mother, and she took Janet Reno's hand and she said, "You must remember this," and she said, "You did it to me." And she just did that over. "You did it to me." Her hand, and Janet Reno's looking down, and but that intentionality, that's the being ahead of the doing. That intentionality, that it's to Jesus. That person that's yelling at you, try to love them. It's to Jesus. He's thirsting, he's hungry for friendship, or he's understanding, or patience, or whatever. So that's what a prayer life equips you for the battle in the office place. That's why I admire Chris Donahue and Dan Danielle and people that are very successful professionally, but they know that prayer comes first.
I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about her facing that darkness, and if the takeaway there for us is to, just try to keep faith and keep working through those periods, or, how can we reconcile that?
Well, I would urge you to ask Mother to help you, because I do think I think her influence is going to be greater and greater in the years ahead, particularly as we grapple with the isolation of so many people. She was asked what the worst disease was it leprosy or AIDS? And she said, no, it was loneliness. And the people that feel unloved, unwanted, unwelcome, they feel inadequate. We get a lot of students that come on our campus that have made big mistakes. They feel shame, they feel worthless, their life's over, they're done, all of these things. So the way that's restored, of course, is through love. And even in the darkness, she loved. People should never quit that, even when they don't have that sensible experience of God's presence. I think Mother was allowed that because she was able to more closely identify with those rejected and abandoned. And in fact, the words Jesus spoke to her were, go into the dark holes. Well, obviously, when you go into Calcutta, and especially you go into places where she started Motaji, I always take our students to go to the actual slums she started in. Those dark holes are still there, miserable places, no electricity, awful, right? And at night, and I've never been there at night, I can't even imagine what those were like, and Mother saw that stuff. To go in there, to come be my light, those were the words Jesus said. So in the midst of our own uncertainty and faith, the most important thing I can suggest, and I think Mother would suggest, is don't go it alone. You've got to surround yourself with people that are going to encourage you and accompany you in the midst of darkness, in the midst of doubt. We all have our doubt. I mean, in many ways, faith is defined by that darkness, isn't it? We have questions, fears. It did not go it alone. That's why these organizations that bring people together, that do the spiritual coaching so that you have some spiritual direction, so that you can read your compass. But all of that, I think, is a call to communion. Mother loved her nuns. When I pull up in the driveway, the nuns would peel out. She'd grab their faces and look at them, and she missed her nuns. You know, she had relationships, real relationships. Loved the women that started with her. They were schoolgirls when she was in her mid-30s, and they were like 16 and 17-year-old girls that started with her. And 2 of them were at the canonization mass, still alive with that original group. She loved them. She knew that she needed to love and to be loved. And if we remember that in the midst of that darkness, I think we'll do fine. If I can close with a prayer Mother used to pray on this feast of All Saints' Day. She prayed this every day. Mary, Mother of Jesus, give us your heart so beautiful, so pure, so immaculate, your heart so filled with love and humility, that we might be able to receive Jesus in the bread of life, love him as you loved him, and serve him in his distressing disguise of the poor. Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.